Welcome to Empowered by AI. I'm Michelle Muncie Silva. This podcast is for women building what's next and using AI with intention. In Season 7, you'll hear from founders, entrepreneurs, business builders who are redefining success, creating on their own terms, and moving with intention. We're learning from conversations about reinvention, identity, and taking action because every episode gives you ideas you can use immediately. Let's get into it. Today, we have Nakshathra, and she is going to lead us into some really important things to consider as founders. So I am so grateful for you being here. I want to give you a chance to be able to introduce yourself to everyone.
Thank you, Michelle, and thank you to all our lovely listeners. I hope you benefit from this episode because it certainly will be something that you can take into your day-to-day work, or if you're a founder or a technologist, hopefully you can take this into your new ventures or existing ventures if you have something already. My name is Nakshathra. I am a cybercriminologist based out of Australia. And I do various things, but at my core, I would say I'm a cyber safety and tech advocate. I am the founder of a safety tech consultancy called Iris. And what we do is sit at the intersection between startup development and social impact. We're embedded in the technology ecosystem. So we help startup founders, technologists, investors, board members, product designers, basically anyone working on developing an app, a product, or a service that ends up in the hands of a human being at the end, to make sure that there's safety by design in the process. And it doesn't actually create more harm. It reduces the harm, or it does not have any harm at all when it reaches that consumer. And that came to me through my research. My background, like I mentioned before, is in criminology. I did my thesis on stalking and cyber stalking and had plenty of discussions with victim survivors of cyber abuse and their concerns when it came to the technologies that they were using. I was very lucky to be offered an academic position by the University of New South Wales, where I currently teach and deliver their first criminology-backed cybersecurity course, but also Australia's first criminology-backed cybersecurity course, where I get to teach the next generation of criminologists about, again, cyber crime and how to bring their thought and perspectives into technical discussions. And I'm also the Oceania Youth Ambassador for a civil society organization called the Internet Society, where we talk about a wide range of topics, but in particular advocating for a safer internet and an open internet that allows for everyone to have digital literacy and making sure that we're championing the future of what connectivity looks like.
Amazing. And I'm wondering, in your experience with criminology, what did you see in how systems get exploited or how they're designed that really convinced you safety by design was a non-negotiable?
So I'll take you back way before I even started my degree. So I have been on the internet since I was 10. And I've seen things that 10-year-olds should not have seen. And I'm talking about 20 years ago. 20 years ago, the state of what social media platforms and the internet was looking like then, with barely any guardrails and a lot of these big tech companies quite in their infancy, but popularity as well. So I'm talking about Facebook, but in its early days. I'm talking about Twitter, prior turning into X. I'm talking about Tumblr. I'm talking about all these other cam apps where you'd be able to live stream. And I remember as a child flagging that I felt unsafe on some of these platforms because of certain design experiences that were happening. And then I started seeing some of my friends, my internet friends, as well as people in my real life commenting on seemingly scary things, but in a very normalized setting. For example, someone cyber stalking them was just like, oh yeah, he stalked me and he found my number and then he texted me. And for me, in my head, I was like, that's not a normal thing to say out loud. That should not be a normal thing to say out loud. But here we are normalizing that behavior. What causes a platform or what causes an app to allow this behavior to continue and why aren't they doing anything about it? So I've always had that curiosity as to why certain spaces allow for bad things to happen. And then when I started my when I did my undergraduate degree, I didn't really think so much into what I wanted to specialize in. But then when I picked my master's topic, I was convinced that I wanted to do something on the internet. So I started looking into places like 4chan and 8chan about incels and incel culture. And from that, I started thinking about what other ways in which cyberspaces operate allows for bad things to happen. And then it became this beautiful loop as to my lived experience and how I was when I was younger and now as an older person, and understanding criminology and crime and how crime happens and the theories of crime, making sure that there is something that can be said and we can draw that bridge between criminology and safety by design. Because if a lot of our listeners don't know, criminology doesn't tend to be used in safety discussions or design discussions because cybercriminology is an emerging field and we don't really get a seat at the table. We kind of have to drag our seat at our existing criminology tables, drag it across rooms, and then put it in there and say, let's have a chat about how criminology can help you in this discussion. So it's very hard to make that connection and then convince people that, this is something that would make sense in their product or even make sense in the broader schemes of giving justice, redressal mechanisms for victim survivors of cybercrime, for example. So a long-winded way of saying that theories of crime and theories of criminology that have been around for many, many years and many, many decades can be applied to cyberspace just because of their versatility. And it's only going to evolve even more. So I anticipate scholars now are going to come up with theories that apply specifically to cyberspace. But then we've got theories like rational choice theory and routine activity theory, which have been around from the 1960s, 70s, and 80s that can be applied to contexts now in cyberspace, which is crazy because obviously the people who have created those theories didn't anticipate that it would be applied in AI settings, but it does make sense. I'd like to draw upon an example for those listeners who want to know what that theory might look like.
Right.
So there's a theory called routine activity theory, which was posited by Cohen and Felsen in 1979, which says that for the perfect crime to happen, there needs to be 3 variables, if you wish. The first one is a suitable target. The second one is a motivated offender. And the third one is an absence of capable guardianship. Now, they obviously created this with the mindset of physical crimes, like a burglary at your house, homicide, assault, all these various different things. So if you leave your home unattended without any CCTV devices, or if you leave your shop unattended without a security guard, that's the absence of capable guardianship. A suitable target, maybe you're in a place where there's not much foot traffic, or you don't have neighborhood watch, so you're this lonesome house in the middle of the street. And a motivated offender is someone who's obviously keeping tabs on your daily activities and wanting to know when you leave the house or when there might be a child at home, so they might be able to, break into the house with a little bit more ease, or they might have an elderly person. So all these different things make up the perfect crime.
Now, when the motivated offender, you just described Google.
Yeah, pretty much, right? And then when you apply that to cyberspace, you've got motivated offender, pretty much anyone who has access to the internet. A suitable target, pretty much anyone who has access to the internet. And the absence of capable guardianship is these lack of guardrails that we have around any product or any service that we're using that allows us to be connected to the internet. And I'm not talking just about big tech platforms. I'm talking about startups. I'm talking about newer products. I'm even talking about chatbots, including the ones that you might use for customer service based on your favorite shop or your favorite, if you're looking at buying flight tickets and the chatbot that you interact with. All these various different things allow for us to consider guardianship beyond just a parent looking over your shoulder, but also this concept of cyber guardianship. And the lack thereof means that crime will continue to persist and crime will continue to generate harms that we haven't even anticipated because of the lack of research that is currently happening in this space.
Yeah. So you've literally spent your career thinking like the motivated offender, right? You got to think like the person trying to break in order to move forward with the solution. But I'm curious, what shifted for you from diagnosing that situation to actually building something that holds up to fight against it? Do you feel like your background with that mentality kind of actually made you more confident as an entrepreneur, as a creator?
Absolutely. Like I said, I started off as a researcher and, I was still pretty much trying to figure out what should I do with this information. Because honestly, when you do research in an academic setting, the greatest thing that can ever happen to you is being published in a journal article. And you kind of leave it as is, and then you move on with your life and you teach, and then maybe you do more research. But I'm not sure where I got this itch, but I remember I was like, I want to do something about this. There's so much research out there that says bad things are happening to normal people, and we keep writing research about it. No one in a big tech company is going to read that. No one in a startup setting is going to read any of the academic articles that are published. Everyone's kind of living in their silos. Can something be done about this? So I went cold turkey on my job. I had a very safe, stable job in the government here. And I was like, no, I'm more passionate about what I've published from my research. And I wanted to spend a year in the tech ecosystem here in Australia just to have conversations with founders about what they were thinking about safety and what they were thinking about their own design processes, or whether they were wanted to hit the ground running and go from 0 to 1 very quickly. So that was my validation point, I would say, where I was talking to victim survivors for literally a year and a half before about their products and their services. And I spent a year talking to founders, and I wanted to see where the gaps were and where I could plug in something, whether it was me creating an educational module or whether it was me doing a big speech or whatever it was. But then I realized over the course of having several conversations with founders that there was probably scope in creating a consultancy format where I sell myself as the product and my expertise to be able to tell our very, very capable, and oftentimes it's not negligent for them to not consider safety by design. It's just the life of a startup founder. It's to force to the very bottom of your list. I thought, yes, I could offer myself as a product and they would be able to understand safety by design, that they didn't entirely need me after they've launched the product, but they are able to champion that design process themselves. So I want to pass on that capability to founders and then not be wedded to me the whole entire time, because they're quite simple concepts. They're not abstract. They're rooted in theory. They're rooted in evidence. But to be able to pass on that knowledge and for them to be able to carry that forward, and whatever shape or design their app or product or version 2.0, or if they decide to launch something else, they'll know that they've had conversations with someone who is a trusted expert, and then be able to carry that capability to their design team, or to be able to champion that. Because I've worked in organizations before, quite separately from this, but I've worked in organizations before, very, very big organizations, where you know that when they started really small, that tone from the top culture, if it had been rectified when it was really small, it wouldn't allow for the harms that it's created when it turned into a medium or a large scale business. So I want it to be a behavioral shift. I want it to be a culture shift. So when your founder, when they're just a founder, is able to say, hey guys, let's take a pause. Let's consider what safety guardrails we can put into this. When they're a CEO and they say the same thing, then it's consistent messaging. Then people who have been there from day one understand that it hasn't come out of left field, and this is not something that they're championing as their own moral or value, and it's not a financial gain. It's nothing like that. They're just good people trying to make sure that no harm comes to their users.
Yeah. And what does it actually look like in process? Is a specific checkpoint? Is there a built-in safety step that most founders wouldn't have thought about, or they just skipped?
Yeah, so it's different for every product. And I will say this, because we consider both B2B to C, and we consider B2C products as well. So there's founders that go directly to their customers, and then there's founders who create a product that goes and sits with a business, and then it goes to a customer as well. And it's different at every step because the people who come to us either come to us at an MVP stage or they come to us like right before deployment and they just want to check whether they're good before they deploy as well. The step itself, I would say, if you're considering safety by design, or if you haven't even started creating your product, think of it from the very, very beginning when you're mapping out your usage. That would probably be my best piece of advice. Traditionally, when you're a founder, you're thinking about, hey, like, okay, what does my customer do? So my customer will get up, they'll use their phone first thing in the morning. And for example, if you're creating a health app, and they might check how long have I slept. This is how their journey would look like by navigating the app. Great. At what point have you considered privacy? At what point have you considered what data you're collecting and how that's being used? At what point are you considering the different design features that might make this inaccessible for someone, for example, who's visually impaired, or for someone who might not understand the way in which the various buttons on your app might not work? Are they aware of the data that is being collected and the way that it's being used? And if you're using AI, are they aware that their information is being used to train an AI model? Is that a localized AI model? Is that an open model that is being used and you're collecting data from various different consumers and you're putting it out into the ether and it's being trained and other people will have access to it? All these various different concerns that I see as someone coming from the criminology background, but the founder generally does not. So when you start your user journey process, I would recommend thinking about safety by design. Safety by design is obviously a framework that was posited by the Australian E-Safety Commissioner, and there were 3 points to that. So there's service provider responsibility. So the provider of the service themselves will have to make sure that there's accountability in the way in which they foster, and they need to create safe spaces. There's transparency and accountability. So to make sure that they are transparent about the processes in which they take various different like information, or they allow for like users to interact with them and raise reports saying, okay, like, I raised a ticket about this particular instance that happened, and this is what we did about it. And that's the transparency and accountability piece of the thing. And then to make sure more, like, I realized that these, I want to be careful when I say this. Safety by design in its core needs to be something that extends to not just like big tech platforms, but to like smaller tech platforms as well. So I posited 2 other like additions to it. And one of them I'd like to discuss here, which is something called proactive conduct shaping, which I want for founders to consider as this broader element of this behavioral change that they need as founders to consider their consumers not just as paying customers, but also as human beings. Because when I was speaking to victim survivors, they were quite scared of how the crime types that they had experienced, for example, online harassment, for example, cyber stalking, was actually being amplified by AI, which meant that they were quite hesitant to use AI products. And that means that you might have a very hesitant customer who might actually purchase your product, but they're still worried about AI and they're still worried about all the different things that might be collected from them. And while they might not have the courage to ask you, how are you using it? I think there still should be this transparency, this accountability, and, proactive conduct shaping that happens for consumers to be able to understand their own civil liberties, I would say, in interacting with your product. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, you're a founder, you don't want to create more harm for your user. But there's also reputational damage. Like if you put a product out into the world without mapping out your user journey, without having a proactive mindset when it comes to harm and potential criminal or psychosocial outcomes, you might have to pull your product off the market. You might have to do an apology statement. You might have to go to, that would be what I say your worst day as a founder and your worst case scenario. And you would have to work backwards from that. And that's not very ideal. So a scenario that I try and run with founders is the worst case scenario, and for them to
Mhm.
publish a media statement about a harm that has and that means that they have to apologize to their consumers or either pull their product off the shelf, as I say,
Mhm.
and how that looks like, and then for them to be able to creatively think about all the different ways in which it can go wrong. Then they take that back with them and then speak to their team about how can they realistically manage all the risks that were mentioned in this apology statement, and is there a way for them to never be able to publish this statement whatsoever. So that's it. I mean, it's a creative exercise that we like to run and even have conversations with founders about, because I guess people always think that the biggest scandals that can happen are like, workplace affairs or like some money embezzlement. It's not that. It could mean a customer takes their own life because of something that you didn't put a guardrail in for an AI chatbot that your product uses. And that is something you're going to have to take accountability for, because unfortunately, that is the nature of in which we using technology these days. Anything can happen. And we just have to be prepared for all the possible outcomes that we have within our reach.
And there is sometimes a pressure for founders. They're told to move fast, to get something out there, to be first, to fill that gap. So, what do you feel is harder than people expect about building in that safety from day one? Is it the time? Is it the money? Is it how complex you have to think about it? What is the thing that is the hardest to bring into your planning?
It's time. It's absolutely time. When a founder wants to launch, they've got their traction, they want to launch immediately into the market, they're not looking at all the other things that could be embellishments. It's like I've heard this from people. It's like safety by design is like a beautiful little tiara that you can put on your product. And that's something that looks nice, it's shiny, and it does the job, and obviously you can sell it better. But obviously it's really hard to be able to sit and wait for the perfect tiara to be made and then fit your product appropriately. So when I talk to founders, they're always like, oh, but we don't have time. We just really want to get it out into the market, get our money back, or we really want to prove to investors that we're doing the right thing when using their money appropriately, and then we can get even more investors, all these various different things. So it's absolutely time, especially if you're a very small startup team. You don't have many people who can be dedicated to sitting down and mapping out what safety by design looks like. But I also say this, I'm like, but imagine the amount of time you're saving by considering this before you deploy, then after the fact, and then having to retract your product or temporarily pause product, and then having to explain to all your investors, to all your consumers, this is why you've temporarily pulled it off the shelf. So and there's also, I would say, time, but also a lack of understanding and education about how important this is. I'm not sure if many of our listeners even know about safety by design, as I started off this episode with. A lot of people don't understand how important it is. And they're like, oh, it's out of sight, out of mind. It's not something that's going to happen with my product. It's like my target consumer base is very, very small, and none of them are going to experience this. But I think we work with assumptions that everyone is, cisgendered, heterosexual, able-bodied, English is their first language, don't come from marginalized communities, understand the repercussions of having access to the internet, all these various different things. But then those assumptions are quite harmful in and of itself. Right. That everyone can be a target of a cyber harm or a cybercrime in this day and age, no matter how digitally literate you are. All they have to identify is your vulnerabilities. And it's not just from a security perspective, like, oh, I've stored everything on a cloud server. It's not that. One simple design feature on your product, and someone could literally never use technology ever again, which is what victim survivors told me. They stopped using certain technologies because for them, when they experienced cybercrime, how terrorizing it was for them, everything in the internet looks the same to them. So applying for benefits, shopping, talking to a loved one on Facebook, all of that in their head is psychologically traumatizing because it's just one big extension of the internet for them. And you don't want that. You want people to stay connected. You want people to be thriving in this digital world. So you don't want your product to contribute to that. And I don't say this from like a fear-mongering perspective. I say this from if you have genuine concern and compassion for humans around you, then
Yeah.
you might take a beat and just consider safety by design.
Right. No, it's a perspective of empathy because you really cannot live in anything but your own perspective. So to assume that every single one of your clients has had the same perspective of you, that's an error in marketing. That's an error in design. And ultimately, it's going to be an error that, as you pointed out, leads to consequences. So for all of us now, let's say as founders, we have this idea of success. I'm really fascinated. How do you personally define success now? Is it possible that you feel that you can actually lead on both innovation and safety? Or do you feel like it's constantly a trade-off that you're managing?
I would say it's a trade-off, but I've started to learn that success for me is probably having one meaningful conversation with a founder about what their product could do and then changing their mind about it. That would probably be the most successful thing for me. And it might not necessarily mean that, I have landed a client, but I've definitely changed someone's idea or understanding of how perfect their product is, and they can go directly out into the market. That to me is also impact, because I have changed someone's perspective and understanding just by having a conversation. Obviously, I would love to work with them and create more meaningful change by offering my perspectives, but that would mean even more success. And I'm very grateful for my clients to be able to work with them on that journey. But I always think that if you're creating a startup, you are already a very, very motivated not offender. What am I saying? Motivated person.
Yeah.
Sorry. You're already
Understood.
you're already a very, very motivated person, because you're taking a chance on yourself, and you're taking a chance on an idea that no one else has thought of. You're thinking about funding yourself, whether you're bootstrapped or you're thinking about asking someone for money or asking several people for money, or you're trying to raise. Like that's, whether it's grants or other kinds of schemes. So you're already inherently someone who wants to do good and right by your consumers. Anyways, you want to create impact, and you want to do that by innovating in a way that seems feasible for you. All I'm asking for you to feel success in any way is to make sure that you consider how your design processes could potentially be hurting someone. And like you said, it's an empathy equation, it's a compassion equation. Most of my job is teaching humans how to be human and to remain curious about the entire process, and not just, receive their first check and go straight into, into the market and, wreaking havoc. But there will always be this question that I ask founders about: why are you actually creating your product? And if some people are like, for the money, I'm like, great, there's no point in talking to you. But then some of them are like, look, I've had lived experience. I'm a woman and I want to create a product that allows women to appropriately track their periods, for example. Or um, I have lived experience as a refugee, and I want to create resources that allow for people to bridge the gap between their own linguistic understandings and then navigating a world where they don't necessarily feel like they're fit in. Just a couple of conversations that I've had. And I know that at their very core, these fundamental values make them a better founder. And a lot of female founders, a lot of queer founders are probably the best conversations that I've had. They champion this way more than a lot of the other founders that I work with and I speak to, and I go to networking events and I have conversations with. So I strongly believe that success for me is defined by those conversations and the meaning that can result from that. But I also see these people go off and do great things, and I know that they've been able to understand what I've said. And then I see that as success as well, even though I might not have directly worked with them my ability to do that, but it's still something that brings me great joy.
That is amazing. And how fulfilling. So when people want to reach out to you, they want to work with you and learn more about this for their own products, where would they go?
You can find me on LinkedIn. I am very available. You can see all the different things that I work on and all the different facets of cybercrime as well. That is very, very appealing for me to understand. And obviously, with the rise of AI and emerging technologies, I'm considering working with those startups even more now. So if you are working on something that has AI in it and you just want to have a chat or a conversation about how your product or your service could be safer, or even if you're a small business and you're trying to experiment with AI and you just want to know whether you're doing the right thing, please reach out. I'd love to have a chat. And obviously, hopefully, you can walk away with something that you didn't know 5 minutes before you joined a call with me.
I love it. I love it. What a gift. What a priceless service that you're offering. I wish you all the best with that. And I am going to want to keep in touch with you to find out how this goes, because I think you are going to win hearts and minds and ultimately save a lot of companies a lot of heartache.
Thank you so much, Michelle. And thank you for the opportunity to reach out to lovely, lovely people and our listeners on our podcast.
You've been listening to Empowered by AI, and I'm your host, Michelle Silva. If something from this episode clicked, don't let it stop here. Take one idea and try it out this week. And if you want to go deeper, head over to the Empowered by AI, the Slay Effect YouTube channel. Like, subscribe, and join us there so you don't miss out on what's coming next. All the links and resources are in the show notes. I'll see you next time.